What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek, back for another episode, guys. And Derek, it feels like it's been a long time since you and I have been together. It feels good to be back. How are you doing, man? How was the game a couple weeks ago? And then how have you been? I feel like we haven't seen each other in a bit.
Yeah, it's definitely been crazy. And you know how it is every year around the holidays. It always gets very busy for you and I for this stuff. But yeah, I mean, talk about going to that game. It sucked. It really sucked losing the game the way we did. But I'm glad that Indy was able to bounce back against the Steelers. It makes the loss feel a little less worse than what it was. So.
Yeah.
All in all, everything's been good, man. Just working, doing this channel, trying to build the other channel, just keep trying to do more content, man, and get ready for this end of the season. How have you been, man?
Been good, yeah. Like you said, it's just a crazy time of year, between family. Feels like 100 Christmas parties that I'm going to. It's just wild, but all good at the same time, and it definitely makes it even a little bit better, a little bit of a cherry on top that the Colts are right now in the playoff picture and have been very good and have won 5 of the last 6, I believe it's been. So it's been great to see that. It's funny, Derek, you mentioned the Cincinnati game, how bad that game was. I tell you, man, about a quarter and a half into the Pittsburgh game, people were saying, Cody, you're bad luck. You must be bad luck streaming. You know how people say about our guy Logan, who does the content about how whenever he goes to games, the Colts lose. Well, it was the same way on the channel. And so definitely felt good when the Colts started getting their stuff together in the second half. So, but yeah, definitely feeling good, man, about where they're at, about just the time of year. I love Christmas and excited, man, about the next couple games here for the Colts because they're going to be huge.
Absolutely, man. And it's funny that people say you're bad luck. Like the Colts have lost one game, Cody, since you've been married, bro. I'm just telling you, you did that decision has definitely helped spark this little winning streak that Indy has going on right now. And listen, I mean, I get it. Yeah, I'll be back to doing streaming here for the next couple weeks. I know I haven't been available, but hey, listen, it's really cool that and it was the shout out to our guy Logan, who finally got his revenge and finally got to break his own curse of finally going to an indie game and them winning. And not only winning, but having their most convincing win of the year, let alone anything else. So, yeah, shout out to him.
It was like it was like the two curses, the curse against Pittsburgh and the curse of Logan, and they canceled each other out and the Colts won or something. I don't know. But, yeah, it's crazy to think about when I saw that stat, Derek, that the Colts hadn't beat Pittsburgh since 2008. That's just wild to me that that's been that long. But, there's been a lot of tight games. But, yeah, I guess the Colts have just found ways to lose against Pittsburgh. So, great to see some of those curses lifted. And I feel like really the last two that Shane Steichen has to do, and he can't really do it this year unless, of course, the playoffs, something happens there. But winning week 1 and winning down in Jacksonville, those are like the two things, the two monkeys the Colts got to get off their back with Shane Steichen. But it's been a fun year of getting some of those curses lifted a little bit. So really excited about that, Derek. And so with that, man, I feel like a big reason for that, and that kind of leads us into the transition to talking about the topic of this video, this Indianapolis Colts defense. It's really interesting, Derek, because this defense, when you think about it, you look at stats alone, okay, it doesn't look like a great defense, right? I'm pulling up the stats right here. Indianapolis Colts, 27th right now in points allowed per, in the total season, 21st in yards. Not that great. They're right around a little bit above average when it comes to rushing or passing yards allowed per game. And then rushing yards, they've been pretty poor without Grover Stewart, and they're right now at 26. So you look at those pure numbers right there, and you're like, man, this Colts defense has not been good this year. But, Derek, there's two things the Colts defense, I think, has done this year that they did not do a season ago. Right. While the team statistically probably was better on defense last year, the fact is the Indianapolis Colts have done a great job at getting after the quarterback, number one, and number two, a great job of taking the ball away in terms of interceptions, right? The Colts come in to, these next couple games here. Right now, the top three in terms of getting after the quarterback, getting sacks, and interceptions. And I think those are things that we just didn't see last year, Derek. I mean, the Colts were decent last year at getting after the quarterback. I'm not even talking last year. I'm talking the last 5 to 10 years, it feels like. The Colts have struggled, especially in the pass rush department, to get after the quarterback. It's been something that really, outside of Robert Mathis's, league-leading sack year in 2013, we've seen Eric Walden have a random 11 sack year.
Yeah.
Justin Houston have a couple good years with Indianapolis, which, by the way, just got released by the Panthers. Let's bring him back. I wouldn't mind another veteran addition there. Yeah. But anyway, Danico Autry, obviously, we know what he was able to do with Indianapolis, but they haven't had the type of year from, really all of their starting four, if you will, where they have consistently had their entire unit getting after the quarterback at the rate they're getting after him this year. Right now they're 46 sacks. I think that's one away from the franchise record in Indianapolis Colts history. And, it's not like there's just one guy who's out there and who has, 15, 16 sacks. It's consistently guys right now, Derek, who are pushing that 10 sack boundary. I mean, right now you look at it, there are 3 players on the Colts right now that are under 3 sacks away from being a double-digit sack player. And so the fact that that's kind of all happened is just incredible to see, just where this defense has come the last couple of years and getting after the quarterback, and just because they've added a lot of guys. They've invested a ton into this unit. And so to see that start to pay off a little bit, it's definitely been really, really a positive thing to see this year from this defense.
And especially when you talk about how, of those 3 guys that are less than 3 sacks away, one of them is not DeForest Buckner. And that's the crazy part thinking about it. If you had told me, Cody, that DeForest Buckner would be 4th on this defensive line of starters, not even starters. Dayo Odangbo is not a starter. And Dayo Odangbo is getting more sacks than DeForest Buckner. If you'd have told me that was the situation we're in, I'd have said you're crazy. Honestly, because that is what we have come accustomed to seeing. In the, 3 years that DeForest Buckner has been with the Indianapolis Colts, those last 3 years, we've seen where he has been the guy. This is now his 4th year. But in those first 3 years, he was the guy that consistently got the most pressure. He was the guy that constantly was in the other quarterback's face. And up until last year, when Yannick Ngakoue did it better than him and getting more sacks, DeForest Buckner was still the guy. Everyone talked about, he's the guy, right? And we talked about how we never really saw anyone else take advantage of DeForest Buckner getting the double teams. Well, now you have 3 guys that are all taking advantage of the double teams that DeForest Buckner is forcing teams to have to do on him, because if you don't, then DeForest Buckner will kill you in the middle of the football field. So it's been great to see. And this is truly crazy, because I think last year, statistically, Indy was, a top 8 team in the NFL in sacks by the end of the year. But I think even people would tell you that those sacks, they really didn't feel like they were doing much. I think it just mainly had to do with the fact, Cody, that the offense was so mediocre. It just felt like the defense, even though they got all these sacks, it just really didn't feel like it changed the game at all, because Indy was never taking advantage of the defensive plays that the Colts defense was making, especially in the sack department. But this year, it feels like a different magnitude, because you're right. It's not just one guy doing it. It's not Yannick Ngakoue with his 10 sacks, and then DeForest Buckner with his 7.5, and then the next highest guy is 5.5, 4.5, 4. It's not that sort of situation. You have 3 guys that realistically could finish the season with 10 sacks by the end of the season. And if DeForest Buckner has himself a couple of really great games, Hell, he could too. He honestly could too. So, I mean, it's crazy to see just the whole defensive line become so great. And I mean, we have to talk about it. I think it matters because the guys you have brought in, as you said, the Colts have invested a lot of draft capital and free agency moves into fixing this defensive line. And it's finally paying off for the Indianapolis Colts right now.
Yeah, you asked about last year. The Colts were tied for 10th with 44 sacks. So, and that's through 17 games. So they already have 46 through what, 15 games or something like that? 14 games, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I guess they did have their bye week. So yeah, that would make sense. So through 14 games, they have 46 sacks right now, which is crazy. And it's not like, when you look at DeForest Buckner and you say, oh, well, Buckner's just not having a great year. That's not what it is, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned it. He had 7 sacks all of last year, and he already had 6 this year. And he had a half a sack, in this last week, and he was one of the highest graded defenders. So DeForest Buckner is still very much on his game, and is still very much one of the best 3 techs in the NFL. But you're right in the fact that now there are guys who are taking advantage. I mean, so many guys you can point to. I mean, talk about some breakout years, Derek. I was just looking at it. The top 3 guys here for the Indianapolis Colts in sacks are all having career years in terms of getting after the quarterback, right? Kwity Paye, 7.5 sacks. He's more of the well-rounded guy, I feel like, out of, the top 3, I would say, although Abukum is also pretty good at stopping the run. But like Kwity, I feel like is never going to be that, crazy sack guy. He's just never going to be that guy. He's always a solid defender who I think is a well-rounded player, but he's never going to round into that, 15 sack type of guy unless something crazy happens. I just don't feel like he's that type of player, but he has 7.5 sacks. You mentioned it, he's only, 2.5 sacks away from 10. And we already have 3 more games left to go. So he could definitely get some more there in that last 3 weeks here. And then obviously Dayo Adangbo with what he did, 8 sacks on the year already, and just seems like he's really, really finding himself. He came on super strong at the end of last year, and he has just carried that over here into year number 3, or you could even call it year number 2 if you really don't want to count that first year because of that injury. I mean, he's really warmed up, and he's really become really unblockable getting after the quarterback. And then obviously you got to talk about Samson Abukum, Derek. I mean, I would ask you this. Do you think he's the best free agent signing of Chris Ballard's career so far in Indianapolis? I think you can make a case for it. He's been fantastic. Nearly 10 sacks, 9.5. And Derek, right now, he is ranked as a number 14th player on the edge in the entire NFL. So it's not like he's just a one-trick pony getting after the quarterback, right? 9.5 sacks, but also he is pretty stout against the run as well. And so you look at that, he came into the year, Derek, off of a career year last year in San Francisco, where he only had, 5 sacks? And he comes into this year and he's already doubled the amount of sacks that he had a year ago. So all 3 of these players, guys that you were having to rely on, that you were counting to take the leap, right? Because none of these guys previous to this did anything close to what they're doing now. And you've seen the Colts' faith in these guys that they've invested in via draft or via free agency. Because it was, honestly, Derek, you remember when the Colts signed Abukum, people were saying, oh, why'd you sign a guy who only has 5 sacks? That's the most he's ever had in a single season. Why are you signing this guy to this kind of contract? Right, the Colts took a risk on him. They took a risk on that signing to pay off with more snaps, and so far, so good. So it's been great to see these 3 guys having these career years that they are, and the fact that DeForest Buckner is still doing what he's doing really has made for a dangerous group up front at really getting after the quarterback and making plays.
Ballard just loves to steal those 49ers defensive linemen, doesn't he? I mean, it's pretty much just the counterpart here to Abukum and DeForest Buckner, both coming from the 49ers.
Hey, it's worked out twice.
It has worked out very well for Indy. Again, like you said, DeForest Buckner, the stats are not like the sack numbers are not there. But again, when DeForest Buckner came to Indy in the first year, teams did not realize DeForest Buckner was DeForest Buckner. Like that was at the time when he came to Indy, was the second best defensive tackle in all of the NFL behind Aaron Donald. Chris Jones was arguably in that situation. Now I would argue Chris Jones probably is a little bit better than DeForest Buckner, but I doubt that there's maybe only those two guys that impact the game more from the 3-tech than DeForest Buckner does from that perspective. Very few guys in the NFL on the inside warrant double teams every time you go up on a snap. And DeForest Buckner is one of those. In regards to the three other dudes, I mean, Kwity Paye, his biggest asset this year, he's been healthy, Cody. He's been healthy. Mm-hmm. He's not missed a lot of games this year, and it's allowed him to rack up some of these sacks. And, he's been able to improve on his bull rush. He's been able to get a little more powerful, keep that speed, not look like he's injured, and he's able to get a few occasional plays. He just looks more comfortable in that regard. And I would argue that for the next guy, especially Dayo Adangbo. This is the guy that Indy, when they drafted him, this is the guy that they were hoping they would get with Dayo Adangbo. And I would argue, Cody, he is not even done improving yet. I still think there is another level to Dayo Adangbo that could be even greater. And if that's the sort of situation, then I'm pretty sure Ballard feels the same way about it. Dayo Adangbo, he's not as consistent, I would say, as Kwity Paye or Bukum, but he's flashy. That guy just makes plays out of nowhere. He always seems to find the way towards the ball, and you saw it in the Patriots game. The first 3 sacks of the game all came from Dayo Adangbo, almost all in the first quarter, right? So Dayo Adangbo took over that game. And we saw in the Houston game, he got his hand on a ball with C.J. Stroud. He forced a fumble. We got that. Against Baltimore, I think he had the same thing. It's every once in a while, Dayo Adangbo, while he sacks people, he also finds a really great way to get the ball knocked out as well. He has a great attribute of that. And this is the guy that finally is healthy, learning, getting better. He's young, and he came off that ACL injury out of college, and he's finally getting his feet underneath him. And of course, like you said, with Bukum, I mean, talk about a dude that, like, we said it, like, I think my projected stats for him this year were about 7 or 8 sacks, which I thought would have been really good for this team if they would have gotten that. And now he's at 9.5, and he's most likely going to hit double digits on sack totals this year. I mean, he has taken full reins to he does not get double teamed. He doesn't get double teamed, Cody. And that's where he's able to utilize his speed on the outside edge, and he takes full advantage of it. And I don't know what else. I really am struggling at times, like, because you and I were talking about it earlier, like, how did this team just ascend like this with the defensive linemen? It's very strange. The only way I can really say about it is guys are just more comfortable in the system. I don't know what it is, but like they just got a year older. They got a year's worth of more experience, and guys just got better. I mean, it's just the only way I can really think about it.
Yeah. And then you have key different guys that maybe don't necessarily get talked about, who I think have played a very important role for this team, right? Guys like Tyquan Lewis, who have stepped in, and yeah, it's not the most flashiest thing, but he's done what he needs to do.
Oh, yeah.
You have different guys who have stepped in, and have made key contributions. While it may never show up like in the stats, right? But like they've been solid guys as well that have contributed. I think Lewis has 3 sacks on the year, which is nothing crazy, but like he's been a consistent guy in there.
It feels like he's been in the backfield more than that, to be honest with you, Cody.
Yeah, it does. It does. I feel like his impact isn't shown on the stats necessarily, but like there's just different guys who have come, kind of out of nowhere in a little bit of, situations, or have been kind of reserve key guys that have made this defense what it is right now in terms of getting after the quarterback. So definitely been a great thing to see. I would love to see more at Adamiwa Adebawari as well. I know he's been more of a healthy scratch as of recent, but I would like to see him get a little bit more run. I mean, I would like to see kind of what he can do, because he did show some flashes there a couple weeks ago, kind of in the start of the win streak. He had a couple different moments, especially in that Carolina game. So we'd like to see him, as a rookie, get some more snaps. But regardless, this defensive line's looked really, really good, and it's been really exciting. But Derek, we also have to talk about this secondary and taking the ball away for this defense. I mean, Derek, we've talked about it at great length at this point, how this secondary really has not been dealt a very fair hand this season. I mean, you think about it, you lose your presumed starting cornerback due to, for the year he's suspended due to some betting stuff. That's obviously a huge blow, one that you did not expect. You draft 3 rookies, 2 of them are still in the roster, 2 of them are starting for you right now.
Yeah,
your other starting corner, Dallas Flowers, who is playing pretty well, he goes out really early in the season. And you've just had these injuries after injuries, or bad situations after bad situations. And the fact that that's happened, but the Colts have still been able to take the ball away as much as they have, with Juju Brents, Jalen Jones, Kenny Moore having a resurgent year. The 2 safeties back there, with Julian Blackmon having a career high in interceptions with 4 this year. Probably should have about 5 or 6. I know he's dropped a couple this year. You have, Rodney Thomas still back there. He has a couple. And then Nick Cross, who right now, Derek, is playing at a phenomenal level and just had his first career interception against the Steelers. I mean, this is a secondary, Derek, that outside of really Kenny Moore and maybe Julian Blackmon is extremely young and extremely inexperienced. But you see some of these things and some of these flashes from this team. And you've seen some of these veterans, right, in Moore and also in Blackmon, lead the way and lead the charge with 4 and 3 interceptions respectively there. So talk to me about what this team has done despite some issues, some leaky moments. They've still been able to create those turnovers in the form of interceptions, haven't they?
And I wouldn't even put Julian Blackmon in the category of old. Yeah, I get that he's about to.
He's 25.
He's only 25. I mean, this kid's about to get a really good second contract. When it comes to this, I mean, let's also not forget the Indianapolis Colts are, 19 games in a row, Cody, dating back to last year, of forcing a turnover. And granted, not all of them have been interceptions. A lot of that's been on the defensive line's part because they get the strip sacks. And that's another thing we didn't even talk about with the defensive linemen. They're forcing turnovers. But again, like you said, the big plays in the secondary, that's something that last year Indy didn't have much of. Like Rodney Thomas had a really good year last year at turning the ball over. But outside of that, you have not seen that from the Indianapolis Colts outside of that situation. I mean, you think about it, look, Julian Blackmon with 4 interceptions on the year. Like you said, I mean, the dude practically could have 6 or 7 right now if it weren't for a few times having butterfingers. But other than that, he's on it. Kenny Moore, that 2 interception game against the Carolina Panthers, we took both of those for touchdowns, has 3 on the year. Ronnie Harrison, who's not even a safety anymore, Cody. He was a safety. He's just a big safety. That's why they move him to linebacker, because they said, this is a guy that in 3rd and long situations, he has that Hawkeye ability to be able to do that. And he has only been on this roster for 3 games? And has had 2 interceptions already on the year, one of which went back for a pick 6. So, I mean, that is incredible. Rodney Thomas has had 2 this year. Crazy to think about, I know. Tony Brown had 1. Nick Cross, like you said, had that big one against the Pittsburgh Steelers early in the game last week. Juju Brents has 1 this year, despite missing all the time that he has this year. And then Alubi had that 1 in the Carolina game as well. I mean, again, it's not just 1 or 2 guys that are impacting these interception numbers. Everyone is getting a piece. And I would like to think that the biggest reason behind this, and there's a couple reasons behind it, but I think one of the biggest things is, Cody, is the defensive line's after effect of getting to the quarterback so frequently. You're having a lot more of these errant throws from these bad quarterbacks this year. Because again, AFC quarterbacks this year, they've been just demolished. Like there's been a lot of games this year where you're playing against backup quarterbacks this year. 100%. That's factual. But with the defensive line getting the consistent pressure that it has, you are forcing these quarterbacks to have to get the ball out quickly and make decisions that they don't normally like to do. And when you have to do that against a zone scheme that has a bunch of guys that are really good at getting after the football, like the Colts do, that spells disaster. And it's been a lot of great times where Julian Blackmon's been in a great position. Kenny Moore's been locked out. Ronnie Harrison, in the few games that he's been there, has been getting after it. Nick Cross, I mean, my goodness, he mossed George Pickens, dude. Like, I mean, I don't know if there's any, I don't know how many corners or even safeties for that matter can say that they could actually moss George Pickens like that. I mean, that is incredible. He timed that perfectly. And I know you've been a huge advocate for it's time to get Nick Cross some more snaps. In any way that you can, try to get that dude out there the best that you can. I mean, it has been because the defensive line is forcing these offenses to have to change their game plan because of the way that the defensive line is getting consistent pressure. This secondary has, even though it's been young, it's been able to take advantage of mistakes because of what the defensive line's been able to throw out there.
I think it's twofold because you've seen as well, some of these sacks that we'll call coverage sacks, right? So I do think this secondary has also been good as well, and the defensive line has been a benefactor of this secondary locking down some of these players, and so I think it goes both ways. I think you can see how this defensive line, how good they've been this year. They force some of those inerrant throws, and also the secondary's given this defensive line more time to get after the quarterback. So I think both units are working extremely well together to make this work. And that's a big reason why they're both in the top three right now. And so it's definitely great to see Derek. And for the different injuries this team has had this year, whether it's, different guys being out for injuries, whether it's been suspensions, whether it's whatever it's been, it feels like this team, and especially this defense, has been dealt a lot of just negative things this year, right? And they've had some very negative moments, but when it matters, Derek, and when this team now has gotten healthy, this defense is starting to ball out. They really are starting to do some things. Yeah, they may give up some points. Yeah, they may give up some yards. But at the end of the day, they're doing the things that matter. They're getting after the quarterback and they're taking the ball away, which are huge. And you mentioned the strip sacks, which we haven't even talked about. The Colts are one of the top teams right now in strip sacks. And so just turnovers everywhere. The Colts are doing a great job at doing that in general. So that's definitely great to see, especially with an offense that we know that they've had a tendency at times to turn the ball over. So the fact that the Colts have a defense that can do the same thing definitely helps them out in that department. But it's very exciting to see where this team goes because, outside of a few guys like Buckner and Kenny Moore, you talked about it, this defense is extremely young. Like, they're extremely young. Buckner's not even 30 yet, and Kenny Moore's right there at the edge of 20. So, both these guys are still, when they turn 30, they're young 30, right? So, a lot of young guys here, a lot of guys in their, mid to, young 20s right now, which is cool. A couple guys in their late 20s. But overall, this defense has been pretty good this year in those two departments. And so, it's going to be critical, Derek, for this defense to continue to do this. The Colts hope to, extend this winning streak and win the final 3 games because there is literally no margin for error for this team in the last 3 weeks. These 3 games are must wins.
Yeah. And Indy doesn't win the yardage battle most times, Cody. And that is a situation that Indy has to deal with because there's been a lot of things going on with injuries and everything else that has gone forth. We can argue scheme. We can argue this and that all we want, and that all is valid. But in order for you as a defense to help your team win, if you're going to lose the yardage battle, which most times Indy does, the only way to win games, if you're going to do that, is to force turnovers and to make the big plays in the situations that matter. And Cody,
Yeah.
I can go back a million different times to situations where where the defense was backed up against the wall and had to make a play not only for themselves but for the offense. And Indy's defense has done it time and time again. Last year's defense was a much better defense. They were able to keep people from passing the ball very frequently. They eliminated the middle of the field a lot of times. They were a much better team at stopping the run. Yardage wise, that defense last year was much better. But they were able to but they lacked in making the big play. This year, this team does not lack from making big plays. They make at least 5 or 6 of them every single game. And that is why Indy keeps winning these games, because even if you're going to give up a few points here and there, if you can get your offense, if you could even score off of a turnover or put your offense inside the 25-yard line in opponent's territory from a turnover, which Indy does almost every single game at this point, that is how you win football games. You give your offense the benefit of the doubt. And Indy's defense has been doing that all season long.
Yeah, and that's what good teams do, right, Derek? They close, they finish. And that's how many times did we see that last year where the Colts could have finished. They had the chance defensively to finish. I mean, the Eagles game last year, the Washington game last year, heck, the Dallas game going into the fourth quarter. Like, they had so many opportunities. I only scratched the surface on. There's a lot more games you could point to where the Colts could have and should have finished last year. And that's just what they're doing this year. Whether it's Abukum getting a sack, to win the game in Tampa Bay, whether it's Julian Blackmon getting a, stealing an interception in the Pittsburgh game. Like, the Colts are doing things that matter, that will win them football games when it matters the most. They're taking the ball away, and they're doing a great job of doing that. And that's ultimately, like, even if they do find themselves, Derek, in a 13-0 hole against the Pittsburgh Steelers, the fact that they're able to, that they're good for at least 1 or 2 turnovers per game, like, those sorts of things are huge for a defense to have. And so it's definitely a great thing for this team. And, if they do get into the playoffs, that's going to be a huge thing for them as well, right? And the fact that now they're getting a little bit healthier, maybe they can start to clean up a little bit of the, the yardage and things like that. I've definitely looked really, really good against the Steelers, especially after kind of the slow start. They shut them out. So, I mean, I know it's not a great offense at all. It's pretty putrid, but, like, they did what they needed to do. They didn't let a backup quarterback beat them. And so they're going to be facing another guy, Taylor Heineke, on Sunday, and they're going to have a chance at redemption, because remember, Derek, Taylor Heineke won the game last year for the Washington Commanders. And so they're going to have a chance here at some redemption and proving that they are not the defense they were last year. They're not the team they were last year. They can close out games, and they can get consistent pressure. So it'll be fun to watch, man. I'm really excited to see how the final 3 games go. But yeah, guys, let us know your thoughts overall on this defense this year. Talk about the defensive line, the sacks they've gotten, also the turnovers, the forced fumbles, the interceptions. Talk to me about all that. Talk to us about all that in the comments below. Be sure to smash that like button, turn on subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you know when we drop fresh content just like this. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And as always, guys, go Colts.